obvious suit.
Hello, beautiful people. I am Oliver Perrin, and welcome to A Safer Space. I am joined today by Mr. Tim Rudisil, and we've got an interesting discussion for you. Before we get started, let me apologize for not having posted for about a week, but we've had the Labor Day business going on, and Tim and I have been trying to take a bit of time for ourselves. Now, the topic of our discussion this afternoon will be anarchy in the EU. Is it coming? What indeed is coming? We've got some thoughts on that, Tim in particular, that I hope he will share with us. Before we get started, I do want to enjoin you to continue to follow this channel on Semiagog. We've got about 3 weeks left. Continue to follow the channel Semiagog. There are about 3 weeks left before the content strikes expire there. In the meantime, here on A Safer Space, you can continue to see our discussions and posted clips. Please subscribe to A Safer Space as well. There is also BitChute, where there are analogs for both channels, both Semiagog and A Safer Space. There's Twitter, Gab, Minds, and for those of you interested in supporting the channel, there is Patreon. So thank you to those who have stood by us for all this time, particularly to patrons and everyone else, all our viewers. Now, with that out of the way, turning to this subject of the potential anarchy in the EU, have to ask what you think, Mr. Tim. I've been following the stuff going on with rallies and protests of various kinds in Chemnitz, if I'm saying that right, in Germany. I believe it's kind of near Dresden, and in the east, southeast, I think, down near the border with the Czech Republic, which would make it both Eastern Germany, which is less tolerant of the incursions than Western Germany, and I'm guessing it's probably a more Catholic area, though I can't be sure. So we had expected that things would probably have the temperature increase with like Bavaria and the rest because the Germans in the East are less tolerant. I myself had for some time thought that we may see all of this break out in terms of some kind of reaction and, people being fed up, that we might see all of this break out in France because it's so riddled and overrun, or in Italy. But those places are, as you put it in a discussion with me, they've had a great deal of experience, a lot of practice with eating shit as their culture is eroded from beneath them. So it seems you think that there is some chance that we'll see a reaction out of Germany. And we're certainly seeing people taking to the streets in Chemnitz. I've also noticed that we are coming right up on the elections, which I think are going to happen mid-month in Sweden. I've been checking out Sanity for Sweden's channel. Before this is the last, Tim, I won't keep you hanging forever. I just do want to say check out Stefan over at Sanity for Sweden. He very kindly recommended my channel a week or so back, and I know some subscribers have come over from there. Thank you all for checking it out. My thanks to Stefan at Sanity for Sweden. It's a great channel if you want to hear about what's going on in Sweden from someone with boots on the ground, as it were. So that out of the way, all the preceding preamble completed. Mr. Tim, what do you think we have coming in terms of this potential anarchy in the EU?
Riots in the streets. Riots in the streets. People chasing other people through the streets. Oh, that's already happened. I'm sorry. Yes. Yes, I think it will get worse. Much worse. For one thing, I think that too many people have for too long put up with too much. So I think they have reached the point now where, at least in Chemnitz, whatever it may be called, they're deciding that enough is enough. Is enough is enough. And they don't want no more thank you.
Lügenpresse.
Yeah, Lügenpresse. Lying press. You see, the thing is that people in Germany have decided that A, the government cannot protect them, and B, the press is not telling them the truth.
Well, the government doesn't seem to be particularly interested in protecting them, even if it could.
Well, whether it could or not belies the point of would. The government will not protect them.
I just saw a clip, maybe you saw it as well, on a Vlad Cepich blog, I think. And if I'm remembering it right, it was a bar in Germany where a whole bunch of migrants showed up to some, 90s dance night and showed up 15 or 20 people smashing windows and threatening people with knives and clubs. And apparently, to your point about the government not being able to protect them, leaving aside the question of whether or not they even want to, it was 30 minutes from when the emergency call went out before the police arrived to do anything. And people were basically being chased around the streets, hiding under cars, having windows smashed, taking refuge in the club.
Yeah, sure. Typical anarchy. Typical anarchy.
Germans don't like anarchy, though, do they now?
No, they don't, actually. They prefer order. They prefer order. But order's not being restored, is it? Because order was not, shall we say, even there before? You've got to understand, Ollie. So many of these people have gotten used to the idea that they can get away with anything. Like the group of migrants who stormed the club. All right. I would submit to you that's probably not the only club they stormed.
Indeed.
I would submit further to you that they're doing the best they can, that is to say the Lugan press, to keep all of that under control as far as it's being reported.
Would you mind moving your microphone out about an inch and down about an inch?
How's that?
Maybe just out one tiny hair further.
Ooh, a little tiny hair further. All right. How's that?
Sorry.
All right, good. You see, the thing is that when you start trying to keep these things from being reported, there gets to be an upwelling within the culture itself of knowledge of this. People talk about it, yes. People also tweet about it. People also email about it. Now, I would submit to you that the German police and the German press are hand in glove. They're trying to do their best to keep this under control, and they're failing madly. This is good. What it means is that more and more average German people are finding out that they can't expect the police to arrive in time to do anything. Now, what does that mean, Ollie?
That means one is forced, if one wishes to survive or to see, people incapable of defending themselves, not smashed and beaten, or to protect one's own children, they're going to be forced to defend themselves.
Really?
And that becomes a spark. Spark in a dry countryside in high wind.
Well, now, seeing as how you saw fit to bring up Stefan Tunadal's Sanity for Sweden website, which I am highly in favor of. I've been watching it every day myself. I put in a comment now and again, which Stefan is kind enough to acknowledge. The thing is that Sweden is much more important to this entire mishmash than people think. This next Sunday is when they are going to have the election, as I understand it.
Is it that close? Okay.
Yes.
Soon.
Yeah. And Stefan is very complacent about it. But then Stefan is, he has a job. He works for himself, of course. He has a number of other things that keep him busy. He's thinking of moving out of the city and into the country. He's getting himself situated. The thing is that though he believes that Sweden is important, he does not realize the importance that Sweden has to the rest of Europe.
Well, certainly, I expect it probably has something. Was it Rupert Sheldrake with his morphic field? The idea that shifts, I mean, very vaguely and generally speaking, I'm probably screwing around with the original hypothesis, but the notion is essentially that once you start to have could you almost call it a chain fire effect of individual attitudes changing that yield changes in collective attitude, especially bottled up resentment of this sort. Once it hits the Scandinavians, who I think of more broadly speaking as the Western Germanics, then it will, of a course of necessity, entail a shift through the mechanism of this morphic field in the awareness and attitudes of the Germans further to the east, which all signals that we may get to see some of the boots.
Anarchy's coming. Yeah.
Boots on pavement.
Well, you are. On top of which, you're going to see a large number of people who, unlike Stefan, are younger, don't have any way to get out of it, are stuck in the middle of it, and fed the fuck up with it.
Yeah, some of them have been preparing for it. Yeah.
Yes. And are not as sanguine about it. I fully expect to see a lot of people become violent.
The golden one.
Yeah, the golden one. He's good. I like him. But then I always did enjoy self-satire, though I'm not sure it's self-satire. But that's as it may be. He is thoroughly
exemplary.
Yes, he is exemplary. Yes, he is. Yeah. But be that as it may, he does have that armpit sniffing look to him. You know, no, I expect to see that Germany and Sweden are going to have one hell of a time in the next couple of weeks. I expect to see some of it drift in to France and Italy. Not that we'll be able to get much in the way of news coverage of it, but I expect to see a good bit of the material come unglued.
And speaking of that morphic field aspect, the Dutch are just another Germanic group from the far west. They may take a little longer, but they're burning a little hotter as well. They're no longer quite as happy about all the impositions and obscene
I've noticed taken. That. I've noticed that.
Wilders is still around, good Geert.
Yeah. I fully expect to see some build-up there. I expect, to be honest with you, to see much more in the way of, how shall I say this? The Dutch are much more likely to do something and then have to justify it. The Swedes are much more likely to do something and then have to justify it. The Germans are much more likely to justify and do all at once. I don't see any real problems over there.
But there is the... Well, finish your thought, please. Except
the coming together of opportunity and motive all at once.
Well, but as we've both seen, we talked about it before the call, there's this recent thing with I think it's members of German parliament, don't quote me on this, but a government push at least on the part of the leftist folks holding power, as a result of the events that have taken place in Chemnitz. They are now apparently interested in placing the Alternative for Deutschland under government surveillance because they're so it is said, they're fomenting all these reactions against immigrants.
It sounds like they're just going to trump it. That's what it sounds like. It sounds like they're going to trump the thing. Who is their struck over there?
Yeah. They're just scumbags aplenty. But as we talked about before we began this discussion, what's his name? Old Horst Seehofer, the one that we all probably remember because he had threatened to close the borders as interior minister or whatever, and then he apparently got put into to Frau Merkel's nutcracker, and as a result of that process came out a little bit more timid and calm and wasn't as belligerent or bellicose about it. He has said apparently that he apparently has the security internally for Germany under his control, has said that he will not agree to do that because there's not sufficient justification to place him under surveillance. Whether it goes, whether it doesn't, it's certainly of a piece with all the different types of censorship that they have attempted.
Where's the EU in all of this, do you suppose? Where's that voice of moderation? Wants all things to be just calm and good and beautiful. No EU voice. Makes one to wonder, doesn't it? Oh well. Perhaps Mr. Soros has done enough to Europe at this juncture, and he's now ready to see the masses of blacks and browns, Arabics and whatnot, turned back. Do you think?
Perhaps. I guess that is all dependent upon things that I am not knowledgeable enough to make judgments about, having to do with the best time to buy and sell various currency, to go long or short, and the rest. We're probably coming up on a moment. I mean, we're watching things like the Turkish economy go into the shitter. Argentina's economy is being fucked. Any number of these up-and-coming nations are really under pressure at the moment because of what Trump's doing and various reactions and probably opportunities that people like Soros see. So,
but I just can't understand, Ollie. The African blacks right now with their big meeting on all this nonsense, one in Beijing, where Deng Xiaoping or whatever the fuck his name is addressing them, and he's giving them, what is it, $60 billion?
$60 billion pledged, with no political strings attached, of course, as Xi tells us.
Oh, Xi, yes, that's his name.
The check is in the mail.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. They ought to check with Sri Lanka, the Maldives, and Pakistan about cashing it, though, right?
Well, there's that business with the Chagos Islands now where the WikiLeaks is dumping all this stuff out with documents because apparently there's some move to remove the indigenous people from the island, which is, as you know, Diego Garcia, one of the most important military holdings that we have, Brits have. There's some shared business that comes out of all the shit from World War II where we took control over part of it. But at any rate, that's the Indian Ocean, and that's a naval base for us, which presumably the Chinese won't want to, how shall I say this? The Chinese will be interested in throwing whatever shit at that that they can, because it stands in the way of their control of the seas along the String of Pearls route.
Oh, I see. My goodness. Perhaps it's time then for all of the people of color to be removed from Europe, eh?
Maybe. It seems like there's going to be some more upheaval out there in the world.
Oh, yes, lots of it. Mm-hmm. Got to have that. That keeps the masses happy. The smell of the crowd, the roar of the grease paint, all that sort of thing.
But for a signal of it, I would imagine that we'd have to see some further steps being taken vis-a-vis Libya. because that, as I expect, would be a place where the Europeans would want to establish a beachhead in order to control that territory for repatriation zones.
Libya. Been awfully quiet in Libya lately, hasn't it?
Except for I've seen a little bit going on with the so-called groups that are in control, as though Libya is in any way, shape, or form a nation at this point. So the different factions are beginning to, drive around and attack each other with a little bit more frequency than usual. So, but I've seen no clear signals that would suggest that they're beginning to think about what mechanism they're going to use for the return of these people. What is it?
Boats, I imagine, eh?
Well, one of these countries, I'm trying to remember it now, it's escaping me, has been doing flights out. Maybe it's Austria, but they're very small numbers compared to the huge amounts that are still coming in. 10 or 15,000 a month, even based on official figures. EU-wide.
That's easily dealt with. Easily dealt with. You put out the coast guards of these various countries with orders to
Okay, now before we go on too much further, remember this is a safer space.
That's right. Safer space.
I don't want to have to bleep you out too often.
Oh my God! I'm sorry, Ollie. I'll just dance my little brown unicorns out here. Yes, well, that's one of the things that I understand those horrible people are talking about over there right this very minute. They're doing a lot of stuff like turning them back. A lot of the Coast Guards are turning back the rescue boats. They're making the rescue ships not be able to carry them through there, which is fine. I just don't see any point in being, shall we say, hesitant or reticent about it. But then, I'm an old boxcar buyer myself, I like boxcars. Boxcars are good.
Tumbrils brought down to date.
Well, you got to have something to hold the numbers, If you decide to take in an entire population, then you've got to have the space to put them. I just don't see anything to keep these Germans and the Swedes and the French and the Italians putting up with people who've been refugees and denied refugee status for 15 fucking years. Even one time is enough. But 15 years worth of it? Come on. No, I don't see it. I see a lot of people getting enough is enough is enough is enough, and the water level just keeps rising. And then the damn devil wants to go water skiing. Nah. Anarchy. Yes, indeed. Red bloody war. That's what we're coming to. Yes.
So you think it's much as we discussed, it's just it's taken a bit longer. By that I mean, our discussions about, what was likely to happen in Europe, that we'll first see things like, much of what you had talked about has gone through, where you talk about the right will come out and get beaten down a couple of times early, and then that will grow. And then the immigrants will get more uppity, as we've seen. I think I just recently saw some footage of how migrants were punching Alternative for Sweden supporters in the streets. And
everything I've talked about is coming to pass, Ollie. It's kind of boring, to sit up here and have to go, well, now it's starting to happen. We're beginning to see it.
Oh, the social media stuff we discussed has definitely come through.
Oh, yeah. It's coming through very nicely. And none of it is a big shock. It just takes time.
And what do you think for our European viewers, particularly those in Germany? What should they be looking out for? How do these things happen? What will they see?
Well,
I mean, other than what they're seeing already.
I was going to say the real thing is not what they have to keep an eye out for, but how to manage to survive the coming foolishness and nonsense.
Now, as we talked about it before, it's going to be a relatively brief period of actual confusion.
Well, relatively brief is a world of difference when you're sitting thousands of miles away and sitting in the midst of Chemnitz. A relatively brief occurrence was that nightclub where the immigrants came in and busted it up, chased people around. That was a relatively brief occurrence, wasn't it? Seemed like forever to some of the folks getting chased, though, didn't it?
I'm sure it did.
Yes. Having someone chase you with a knife and you don't know what the fuck to do about it.
And your state, your government has already fully disarmed you.
Yes. Is relatively brief is a very, very relative term. You know, one thing when you're Angela Merkel, it's another when you're Horst Husacker and you're sitting in the midst of a nightclub, or you're some cute little girl who's getting her panties ripped off, and the tender mercies of the immigrants shown to you. Relatively brief is a very relative sort of term.
Almost an eternity.
It can be.
So even if it's a few days, weeks, or months, it can be a real mess.
Yes, it can. And I would suggest to a lot of these people, you know, I'm sure they bought up all the pepper sprays and whatnot they can get, if they can even get them there, that they...
Что за хуйня тут творится?
How do you say yuppie in German, do you think?
I'm sure they have a word for it, some weird fucking compound term.
I am sure. But at any rate, the thing is that when they're in there trying to reason with these people, and they find they're totally unreasonable because they view you as less than human, which is something that the Germans have not yet, most of them, have not yet come to terms with. And that's all right. They'll come to terms with it one way or another very shortly.
Yeah, sehr gut.
So I just don't see any sort of relief in store for Germany or for Sweden. And I tend to think they're both going to go up probably next weekend or the weekend after.
You really think that soon? Because, I mean, you had imagined 2 years back it would be that summer.
Well, I had hoped. See, the thing is that if it had been that summer, it would have been less violent. There'd have been fewer people involved in it. This is going to get to be very, very unpleasant. And I expect to see a lot of people getting enough of anarchy to suit them for a while. I wonder what size tumbril Mama Merkel takes. She's a lovely woman. Mm-hmm.
But you really see it being that soon?
Well, at least the first parts of it, old son, yes.
To me, it seems as though it depends entirely upon the entitled reaction from the migrants. That the real key to this kicking off is more of them showing their asses, feeling that the time has come for them to do so. And that does seem to be about there. I mean, when you talk about nightclubs being attacked and the police not coming for 30 minutes, it does seem to indicate we're getting there.
Oh, it do, don't it? Yes, it do. Yes, it do.
but I tend to think it could range as far out as to Christmas.
You think so? Well, that's all right. Christmas will be good. All the good Islamics will be able to take down the Christmas decorations, they think.